Well, hello class, welcome to Unit 2. I did another video and then I realized that I was running out of time, so I'm starting over. So hopefully I can get it all in this one. Some great work last week. Thank you for that. Thank you for engagement. I hope that my videos are helpful and maybe they even help you to feel like you're even more a part of the class because you have this kind of live, if you will, interaction between the instructor and what's going on in the course. So much like last week, we have a lot to accomplish this week. But I want to go back and kind of hit on a couple of things that were happening last week, okay? And then I want to hit on a couple of things that are happening this week. So basically, it's this kind of, we're going to look in the rearview mirror, kind of adjust that, make sure we're in the right spot, and then we're going to make sure we're headed in the right direction as we look forward to what's to come in Unit 2, okay? So you did a lot. You did a lot last week. Probably more than maybe you expected you would do in the first week of the class. But as you know, we're looking at 8-week terms, so we have to kind of squish a lot into a short amount of time, but very reasonable, very doable. In fact, I've taught this class before with the same amount of content in 6 weeks, and so it worked out really well. So here we are in 8 weeks, and I feel in comparison to 6 weeks, 8 weeks is a ton of time. So I'm going to upload an article from Susan King. Susan King, you may be familiar with her. She's a JD, so she's a trained lawyer, but I don't think she's really operating as a lawyer anymore. Because a number of years ago, she wrote a book called Quiet. If you haven't read that book, I would encourage you to read that book. It's a book about basically how to survive for introverts, as she would identify herself as being very introverted, how to survive in a world that won't stop talking. And maybe if you're an introvert, that's the way that you think. Like, I just need people to shut up. I need my space, I need my solitude, I need to think, I need to, go away and read a good book. But at the same time, realizing the importance and value of being around people. So here we are in this class, and one of the assignments that we're doing on a weekly basis for a little bit is we're going to spend some time in solitude. And so I just want to make that equation, that connection of how important solitude really is, how important quiet is, how important silence is. It's interesting. I teach primarily the majority of the teaching that I do is at the undergraduate level. And I teach a class, the final class in a minor that I oversee on campus, and I had them do basically what we're doing in this class, but not as long, okay, not as many days or weeks, I guess you could say, in a row. And we call it sabbatical. It's our sabbatical lesson for the semester. And I had a student who was I think a Christian ministries major, and he was saying, we in my major we're being prepared, we're being trained to go on and be pastors. And we're going to lead churches, and we talk about how important sabbatical is, and we talk about how important Sabbath is, and all these things. And yet, all we do is talk. We don't actually do those things. And in the minor, it's only 5 classes, so 15 units. He says multiple times we have actually taken Sabbath rest. And so he said it's been so refreshing because we're not just talking about it, we're doing it. Because as pastors, we're telling our parishioners it's important to take rest, but are we ourselves doing it? And that was the question he asked. And so in these courses on leadership, which he found to be so valuable as it prepared him to be a pastor, his thought was, man, this is great because I'm actually getting to do the things and finding incredible value in it that I'm potentially going to be telling people to do here in the future. So again, this is... there's great rationale behind why we are spending time in solitude to think, to pray, to contemplate, to consider who we are, where we've been, and of course where we're headed as it relates to this class and potentially in the rest of the program, and then, of course, life after the program. So really do take that time seriously. A lot to accomplish this week, but let's go back really quickly to last week. A lot of good discussion. Really enjoyed kind of hearing what I was hearing. If you want to kind of equate what you typed to what I was hearing as if it were to happen in a class. So I appreciate all that kind of you engaged with, the discussions. And there was a great question that I want to hit on. It was in the introduction section, so thanks for all those introductions. They were very valuable, getting to know who you are and where you're from. And I will hit on a number of these questions. Unfortunately, I don't have time to hit on all of the questions in a brief video, or else I'd be, posting hours at long videos and no one would watch them. So I don't want to post things that no one would watch, and I don't want to post things that would take hours to do because I know that no one watched them, and so it would kind of be all for naught, right? But the question that was asked, and I'm so grateful for this question because I think it's so important. The question that was asked is essentially, and I'm not going to ask it exactly, so I'm not looking at it, but I've been thinking about this question, is can we make our jobs into a vocation? Can we make our jobs into a calling? What a great question. And that's a really great question. So thank you for asking that question, because I'm sure that many of us are asking that, are thinking about that. I like what I do, but is it my vocational call on life? Like in my entirety of life? Like, what if I'm not supposed to be here? What if this isn't my calling? Is it wrong that I maybe even would say I love what I do? No, I don't think so at all. So let me kind of give you a longer answer, and I'm only going to answer it in part, because part of this academic exercise, right? So this learning exercise that we're undertaking in this class is for you to come to a place of maybe not full conclusion, but a better understanding of what vocation means to you, okay? So let me give you, actually I'll give you two examples. The first one is this. When I was a younger individual, probably in high school, late high school, I read this book. I'm not going to mention the name of the book, but it's a book that I hope no one ever reads again. Okay, and in fact, the author has kind of denounced the book that was written so many years back. And basically, this book convinced me that there was one person in the entire world, the world of 7 billion people, who was to be the one. Right? So there's one of me, and out there, floating around in this abyss of 7 billion people, is the one for me. And so I thought, man, that's a lot. Oh, I gotta make sure I pick the right one. So I would use language like, I think she's the one. All right. So what happens if I get married to somebody? I just celebrated 13 years of marriage to my wife. What happens if turns out that she's not the one? What happens if I pick the wrong person, the wrong one? So what if I was supposed to be married to, let's just make up a name, Julie? And I didn't marry Julie, I married Katie. Well, does that mean that Katie was actually somebody else's the one? So by taking Katie, who was that person's the one, and not taking Julie, who was supposed to be the one, Katie's the one has to marry somebody else because I took their the one. And so then, this is getting complicated. So if I took their the one, that means that somebody else's the one was taken by them, and that means that somebody else's the one was taken by them, and so forth. And it starts this domino effect because, of course, the world revolves around me, and I'm so important that I started a terrible domino effect of people picking the wrong person to marry because I chose Katie when I should have chosen Julie. And as I talk about that, doesn't that sound ludicrous? I mean, that's just ridiculous to even think that that's a reality. Not to mention, it puts incredible pressure on us, on me, to make sure that out of 7 billion people, I pick the right one to marry. And if I don't, then I royally messed up the entire world. I think that's a similar way that we so often think about work. And one of the questions that is related to this content was, can I confirm that I'm in my calling? Well, do you love what you do? No, I don't love what I do. That doesn't mean that it's not your calling. Do you love what you do? Yes. Well, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily your calling. And so this is a very confusing thing. It's a very confusing thing, which is why I think it's so important that we go back and forth in this class and discussion. Okay. So we could look at the Reformation doctrine of vocation that was made famous by Martin Luther. Okay, we could look at that. And one of the things that Luther talks about in there is it doesn't matter where you are on the work spectrum, if you will. In fact, this week somebody said that one of the things I need to unlearn are their own tendencies to devalue work. And if you think back, and maybe kind of some of the history, if you will, of work and vocation, understanding of calling and so forth. But way back when there was Socrates and Plato and all these, great philosophers, these great minds, to hang around all day and basically just philosophize, that was seen as having reached the penultimate, the highest. This is the most meaningful work because I get to exercise my mind. And the thought was, if you're doing normal, everyday, menial work, then that's not nearly as important. It's not nearly as dignified as the work of these philosophers. And then there was this thought within the more spiritual realm, if you will, or the more religious realms, that if you were of the clergy, then what you were doing was, of much more meaning. So if you were a monk, or you were a nun, you were doing incredibly important work, whereas everyone else was doing work that was important but not nearly as important. So we still, to some extent, have a hierarchy where we say certain work is more important than others. But Luther would say that it doesn't matter if you're, basically, I mean, he literally said it doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home mom, or you're the king, or you're the queen, or you're a stay-at-home dad, if you put it in all kind of modern-day terms. It doesn't matter where you are as far as work goes. There's dignity in all work. And so as you are working to unlearn your tendencies, and I include myself in this, to devalue work, well, that work is less important than that work. And this work is more important than that work. One of the things we need to realize is that all work is important. Incredibly important is all of our work. But I don't think we necessarily think that way. I had this conversation with students, and I had some students in my leadership courses, and they weren't taking their studies seriously. They weren't coming to class prepared. They weren't even showing up. They weren't doing the work. They weren't reading the books and so forth. And I said, look, I know that there's this thought that leadership studies, it's important, but in comparison to, say, those that are pre-med. So if you are, in a pre-med major and you're taking your senior seminar last class in biochemistry or something to prepare you for medical school, and you would say, well, this one is much more important because medicine is about saving lives, whereas leadership is not. Well, I get what you're saying, but are you really going to hierarchy one over the other and say that this class or this discipline is more important than the other? Because, well, granted, I, as a leadership scholar and researcher and instructor, I'm not necessarily, using a scalpel and cutting open, with the most meticulous of incisions somebody's heart and transplanting the heart. I'm not doing that. But I do have a responsibility to my followers. And in many ways, I think if we're being really honest about what's going on, those of us in leadership roles that have significant or even insignificant, meaning smaller numbers of followers, their livelihood is in many ways hanging in the balance. We are holding their livelihood in our hands. And so again, we're not cutting into somebody's body, but we are, essentially overseeing their overall well-being. And to say it's a matter of life and death seems a bit hyperbolic, but at the same time, I think that there's some truth to that. So can we create a vocational call in what we're doing? I think in some respects, yes. For me, I never intended necessarily to end up as a university instructor. And here I am, assistant professor, overseeing an academic program, developing courses, and so forth. I love what I do, but I wouldn't tell you that, I woke up one morning and realized that this is what my life's call is. No, in fact, yes, I happen to love my work, but I love more so what my work does to allow me to pursue the thing that I feel the most called to, and that's to serve the local church. So I've been in ministry for years. I haven't been in paid ministry since 2004. So here we are almost, 13 years later, and I have been able to have work that supports I always like to refer to as my habit of serving the church, because that's truly what I feel called to. But ultimately, what I feel called to is to serve other people. So from a vocational calling standpoint, for me anyway, I think that I can find that anywhere. Brian Dick and Ryan Duffy wrote a great book called Make Your Job a Calling, and I think that they would say similar things. Can you find meaning in meaningless work? Yes. Is the work actually meaningful in and of itself, or is it meaningful because what we make it into be? We make meaning within work. I think that that's probably the more appropriate question to ask. So as you're working through the class, you'll find out some of the answers, and then you'll kind of unpack more questions, and it'll kind of let your head spin a little bit. But I hope that we can bring resolve and kind of conclusions, especially as it relates to your final assignments. Okay. So this week, that's a lot of content. You're reading a couple articles. I think there's 3 in here. This is your week 2 unit video. Okay. And then you've got 3 forum discussions to discuss. You've got an assessment to take. You have a book review that's due at the end of the unit. And then, of course, your presentation is to be submitted for your vocation and calling presentation from the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics article. All right. Any questions? Email me, call me. Then again, next week we start the Buckingham book, and we're going to have some great times and discussion. I'll post some more videos throughout the week. If I can help in any way, let me know. Hope you have a great week, and we will definitely see you online.